Some of you know her personally. She works in the translation service of OPS and was the person responsible now for the revision of the translation of the ICD-11. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. I can hear a couple of voices. I think you can hear me. As Vilma said, for those who don't know me, I'm Maria Fernanda Lozano, and I am in charge of the Spanish translation in the Pan-American Organization for Health. As you can see here in this presentation I've prepared, in 2017 we started to collaborate with this project in virtual meetings, replying queries we've received. And from 2018 we got involved completely in this project. As perhaps some of you remember, we participated in the workshop in Colombia to prepare the work plan, the final one in the translation from the ICD-11, so we later began with the area of the revision in the Spanish version. The formal revision began in September 2018. We hired 2 doctors, specialists in medical translation, to do a revision of all chapters, the most complex chapters from the medical point of view. And they worked full-time for 3 months, September, October, and November 2018. And in November 2018, apart from the work they were carrying out, they began from the translation services here to review some of the pending chapters in the platform. So now, in February of 2019, we will do the final adjustments. Could you change the slide, please? I think it might be interesting to be aware about some of the pending aspects right now regarding the Spanish platform. First of all, very recently, there was a new field added in the platform, which are notes about coding, that was not translated. So we have been doing the translation of this new area. But in some chapters, it's possible for some of these notes to be in English. There are some codes created automatically in the platform and not always have been corrected. We're trying to solve these problems. For instance, there's an example that now is solved, but to give you an idea, it is an automatic creation of this code. As you can see, there are some other specifications. It's legible in Spanish, but we're working and trying to correct these codes that haven't been reviewed. There are some issues related to congruence related to some chapters, and we still haven't been able to finish the full revision of 6 chapters on mental disorders, on behavior and neural development. That has turned out to be one of the most extensive chapters in the platform, and there has been a deep work, but still is not done. Doesn't have a revision. So there are some pending things in this chapter. Could you go to the following slide? And just another comment about some pending aspects that I haven't mentioned. There are still some codes. There are still some modifications, pending modifications in this. And we have to link the Spanish version to the English version because there are some things that are still not aligned completely. And finally, something that might be interesting to you is that since in February we will still be doing some final adjustments in the Spanish version, and when you begin working with this, you will observe specifically, if you observe a mistake, a severe problem that might have been missed, you can write to the address, the translation services. As you can see, translation.services@paho.org, in order to communicate any modification proposal you may have on mistakes, errors you may see in the Spanish version. Vilma, I don't know if you can show you, but when you go to the browser in the blue platform, you can copy the new URL address of each code, so you can send a message in which you can include this address, and it's going to be easier to locate the code. So please include which one it is, the current text and the modification proposal. I don't know if anybody has a question. I don't know if it's possible to provide more information regarding this. Thank you, Fernanda. I would just like to say that to you, I haven't been able to show the whole blue version, but tomorrow we'll have a new session. Perhaps I could show a little bit more. Okay, and another thing, Fernanda, regarding the fact that we work with two, actually this is a bit difficult because we work with two versions. We're translating in the foundation that has all of the components, and some components is that it's been showed in the blue version to the public, that goes to the public. So this is a different thing which we are adjusting, which is in the foundation. The blue version, which is linked, or better yet, corresponds to the English version, which is completely finished. It's finalized. Yes, that's right. Because I have a doubt. Are the corrections being done for Fernanda, on the chapters of the mortality and morbidity link in volume 1 in the list of ICD-10? Now they're doing the translation in ICD-11. If there are mistakes in that place, they have to be corrected in the platform. Because, and I imagine this is a question for you. From the platform, you get the alignment to build line number 1. So if you make corrections in volume 1, you need to correct them in the platform, in the how do you call it? In the foundation sheet, right? Just to clarify, the translation is always done at the foundation, in the foundation. So, and from there they make an extraction about the categories that appear in the table, in the list. In that case, we're speaking about the list for statistic modalities. In the future, we may obtain different lists, different tables, but the important thing is that everything being done in terms of translation is always being done in the foundation. Yes, this is a concept which took a while to get used to. The foundation continues to move. So one of the things that we want to discuss with you and Fernanda is how to make this update on the changes. But the blue version will be, it's not going to move, it's not going to change until, well, OPS and WHO defines when. Oh, it's difficult. And the other point is that we basically speak, as Vilma and Fernanda mentioned before, we're speaking about two versions. We're speaking about the orange version, which is the version where they do the development exactly. And there's an official version, which is the release version, which is the blue version, which basically represents a fixed version from a clear reference standing. And of course, one thing, when speaking about updates, which we'll see jointly with Marcelo, that has a huge importance, which is the inclusion, or better yet, improvement of the index, together with the terms analysis, which we will collect from all countries that have mortality, morbidity to enrich the index regarding the terminology variation. And that is going to be something that will need an update on the translation on those versions. But we need to get to an agreement on what will be the timeline that we'll work on. If anybody has a question, thank you so much, Fernanda, for your work. And of course, you can write to this email address if you have any doubts, any question regarding the platform. Thank you, Fernanda.
Con el paso slide. Bueno, maestra, solo pequeño la imagen. Bueno, ahora por ellos.
Now, for those who don't really like English, it's better to use the interpretation system because it's going to be in English, so it will be easier. Entonces, dicen que la reputación es la madre de la sabiduría. Y van a ver que en esta presentación hay un poco de reputación con respecto a lo que tenemos o lo que hemos tenido en las últimas reuniones, y también cuando se hable y abren ciertas superposiciones con lo que hemos visto, porque es muy importante. Creo que muchas personas aún no trabajan con el CIE-11, entonces tenemos que hacer esta parte del programa educacional. Y como saben, de la teoría educacional, es necesario escuchar algo 8 veces y luego tienen como un 80% del conocimiento. Pero no vamos a ir tan lejos. Vemos esta imagen, una nueva imagen para el CIE-11. Con este código, si tienen un teléfono móvil, pueden apuntarlo porque les va a llevar a esta página de entrada. Porque el CIE-11 es un producto electrónico. Definitivamente va a haber un libro disponible, sin embargo, principalmente el CIE-11 va a ser un producto electrónico.
You can take full advantage of the classification. This click thing here. How does this? ¿Está un problema técnico? ¿No está? Just a reminder that we have this family of classifications, and as you see here, there are a lot of different classifications in different parts, and we have heard of some of these parts, and you know them all, but this is the old world where you think about books. And the other thing is, now we had ICD revisions over the past years, and you see that ICD-11 is really overdue. It has been over 28 years before we have moved to this ICD-11, and that's why this morning I was saying, yes, it's good that there are a lot of efforts still going on for ICD-10, but it's an outdated classification. Imagine you go to a doctor that for 28 years had no update. Maybe he can treat you, but there may be better methods for doing it. Now, and this is the new world now. And the picture I've been showing before, there is no more separate classifications. We have a big foundation, and we have started with the ICD-11 to the ICD to move it into this foundation. We will be moving the ICF in the same foundation and also the ICI in the same foundation, so that we have one big infrastructure that you access and where you can code all the different detail that you are interested in. We also have in ICD-11 a section where we will have the drug classification, the WHO one, where the medical device classification. So all this will be linked into one information system so that people don't need to take a piece here and a piece there. It's a all shop in one. Now, I don't need to talk in detail about this. I want just to highlight that besides mortality statistics and some other points that were discussed, yes, there is a section on quality and safety. This did not exist in ICD-10. This has been extremely expanded and worked through, tested, and it's already in use in about 3 major sites. Also, ICD is not yet adopted the ICD-11, but they're already using it because it's just useful. The same is for pain coding, primary care, we will see, but ICD-11 has all the concepts that you need in a primary care environment. It has broad categories, it has signs and symptoms, so whoever is doing primary care can easily find the categories. Of course, all the other uses like healthcare costing and progress towards sustainable development goals are things that are relevant at maybe international or national level, but most importantly, with ICD-11, you can do clinical documentation without pain. Why? Because we had these hundreds and thousands of physicians that have been working with us when we did the ICD, so now the language of ICD is the language that physicians do speak. This was different in ICD-10. Now, here is just a brief overview again. So ICD-11, why ICD-11? Well, improved usability, and you will see this again later. We need less training, and we have all the clinical detail for those who want to code the detail. For those who don't want, they can still do very simple coding as well. We have this massive update in scientific content. We can code all detail we want. The system is ready for e-health, maybe I should say digital health, and for use in electronic environments, and it's linked to all different classifications and terminologies. What we have seen this morning already, and thank you all for your contributions and the regional office for coordinating, is the Spanish translation of the ICD-11. We have a Chinese version that is nearly as far. The French will start soon, but the Spanish one has been the first one now that has the first translation, first time in history. So great achievement, and there we can show also all the different features. The timeline, just as a reminder in case you get questions, we started in 2007 with the revision process. In June last year, we released a version where we say the coding scheme remains stable. Let us know if something is not clear, and we received input from the Spanish translation, we received input from the Chinese translation, and some people were testing it and were giving us a few hints. We had now the meeting of the executive board where countries were discussing the wording of the resolution for adoption. Some wanted to add a wording about transition period, others wanted to add some information about traditional medicine. Essentially, the message is there is no question that ICD will be adopted, but the wording of the adoption text is what is being discussed at the moment, and we will be working with the different delegates of the member states to come up with a wording that is politically agreeable with all relevant parties. Now, ICD-11 had extensive clinical scientific input, and we had participation by national and international scientific societies. We had all these different specialists, and if I talk here about 300 specialists, I'm talking about the 300 that were immediate members of the working groups, but they were drawing on networks, so in reality it has been thousands that have provided input, and you see here the big picture. And if we include things that happened in the review of the classification, in the field testing, and also commenting phase, we can say 99 countries participated in one or the other way in the production of ICD-11. And you also participated because you gave wonderful input. For example, at the last workshop, there's the input that came from the translations and, of course, from scientists in different countries of the region. ICD has a big foundation, and this foundation has received input from many pages in ICD, many parts of ICD, and you see there on the top right specialty versions, so the maternal mortality, the dentistry adaptation, the pediatric adaptation of ICD-10, and many others have provided input to this common structure. We had also national modifications where people wanted to be able to code more clinical detail, like the Australian, Canadian, German, and others that have provided input so we can cover all this clinical detail. We have this section on functioning, the link with the ICF. We have the, as discussed earlier, the cancer registration input. So ICD-11 has a histopathology list, and there are discussions with the IARC that in the next 3-4 years, cancer registration will move from ICD-0 to ICD-11, but there will be clear plans communicated, so don't worry, we'll do proper information about this when time comes. And of course, we have the link with the WHO substances, with the ICHI, with the procedure classification, with injury research, and of course links to terminologies for those who want to use it, like SNOMED, or for rare diseases like Orphanet, and even some link with a special classification for primary care that some groups are using. ICD-11 is transparent, so we have this proposal platform, and this also means if you find something now that you want to update or correct or question, and you have some scientific evidence, go to the updating platform, put your proposal, but please also put the rationale, the scientific background for suggesting that proposal, and there is the updating process that will allow to do this kind of updates. Here I show you the most recent process for updating. So you see that we start with a proposal. First we check if the proposal is complete. Then we have a lot of specialist groups that check this, so for mortality use, for morbidity use, for scientific evidence, some for functioning, some for traditional medicine. And then the most important is the Classification and Statistics Advisory Committee that essentially checks whether the output of all this is correctly taken into account and whether they should suggest us to make an update to the classification, and what kind of update, of course. ICD-11 is IT friendly. We will see this later. So we have web services that allow full functionality in any software of your choice. So you keep using whatever software you were using for your documentation. You just will need some IT specialists that make that link. And the thing is, we have online services, so everybody can use the ICD directly with a coding tool or plug in the online services with their software. But the whole thing can be also brought on a local computer or into a local computer network, so you are totally independent of the internet and you can do the same things. And we are working on having this, what we call a container version, where in principle you have an update button to update content or update the software the same way as you're used from other programs that you may be using on your computers. And finally, there will certainly be output files like comma-separated values or CLAMO for those who really want to use it, but we say we discourage using this because then you will not have all these coding features. You can use them to translate a code into what does this mean, but for coding you would not use this, realistically speaking. And finally, I was saying we will have a print version, so those who really like books can still have a book, but of course then also with a print version you don't have all the features and you will need quite some training like with ICD-10 so that people can read this properly and do correct coding. So the exciting thing is what we call application programming interface. This means there is a standard interface where software gives certain commands, hands over the search text, and then the system gives you back the search results. As an output, you have seen the coding tool. So the coding tool itself is using this application programming interface, and instead of your coding tool, you can use any software, and it's very elegant. Nenad will show later how this can work elegantly. And if anybody is interested in the API, just go to this website, icd.who.int, and it's a little bit hidden. Then there is a section where you can go to the API, and you will find information about for technical experts on how to address this interface, what information comes back, and with even software examples in different programming languages so that people that want to do something can easily start and using it. There is a simple registration process where you get what they call a key, and with that key you can access the system with whatever you want to do. The use and the access of this system, just to be very clear, is free. The use of the ICD-11 is free. Nobody will be charged, no company and no private person and nobody. You just plug in and use it. We are at the moment working on the exact formulation for the text because of course we want everybody to use it, but we don't want people to, number one, change the content or to make differences in the content or to program some crazy software that provides different coding results from our reference. So there are some limitations. But essentially the main goal is make it a free standard that everybody can use in a controlled way. Now here we see a little bit what is under the hood hidden in the ICD-11. It's a little bit like looking inside of your mobile phone, where you then see there is a lot of wiring. It's nice to know, but you don't need this information if you want to use the mobile phone. Nevertheless, sometimes it's a little bit helpful at least to know what happens. And you see here, for example, is there a laser? Ah, yes. You see here, for example, that we have a disease here. Don't try to read it, it's too small. A disease here that has a thick blue line and a gray line. It means it has multiple parents. Now the thick blue means for coding purposes it goes along this tree, and in that case it's sleep-related movement disorders that is coded to sleep-wake disorders section. But of course, because it's a movement disorder, it has a cross-link to a certain specified movement disorders, so that if somebody is browsing for whatever crazy reason in the tree, you can see it, and in the output in the browser it tells you excludes sleep-wake related movement disorders that are coded with sleep-wake. The other thing is that we see that this category, this thing here, has a lot of dark blue children, and it also has some, I would tell them, white children. Now the dark blue ones are the ones that get codes, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And these here, well, are separate diseases, but for the matter of statistics, they are kept together in the other specified. And this means that if it turns out that this here becomes very important and needs to be coded in an updated version, we can move this also in the coded area. but this reference, the unique reference, will be the same. So if you have been documenting at the level of the unique references of the entities, you can still use your old data in the new system. So that's one of the big advantages of ICD-11, and that's why we're telling everybody who's working on some software now, say, please make sure that you can handle the ICD-11 code, and also the thing that we call URI, I will show this later, so that you can keep the information at the highest level of detail. Besides the fact, if we use URIs, we can also make the clinicians happy, because instead of having my disease that I like so much disappear in a category that says other specified diseases, I can keep the level of detail so that I have this very exciting special sleep-related movement disorder still in my record. Statistically, we don't care, we put this into other, but for the clinical side, this is a very important aspect. So, and here we see this thing that I was saying with the URI. So we have a certain level where we still have coded categories, but if you want to document, to record in a more detailed fashion, then you can use all these things that are in blue. And the total depth of ICD, it's like what you see is a tree. What you don't see are the roots under the earth. So the total depth of ICD is about 12 levels, of which I think 6 you can see on top, and 6 are hidden in the depth, but you can use them, but in an electronic environment, because we will never expect anybody to manually record or document these complicated, long coded entities. The advantage is, as I say, you can retain every detail, and I know that the colleagues that are working, for example, on rare diseases are very excited about this feature, because this means that if people are doing the documentation, you can capture all the rare diseases. And ICD-11 has been working together with the rare diseases repositories, so we have some, I think it's about 5,000 or 6,000 rare diseases that are there. They don't have a statistical code, but they have this unique identifier, so you can track them if you want and if you can in your system. ICD-11 is user-friendly, so we have easier coding, we have these coding tools, and more instructions are also built in the classification. You have seen this picture with the multiple parents. In the past, you always needed somebody to say, oh, the people always have confusion, let's put an exclusion note in the classification. Now with this new structure, much of this is already built in, together with coding notes and other information, and you will see that the very new version of the coding tool, even in the coding tool, already shows you this kind of context, so that if you want to do coding, you don't need to go to the browser anymore, you get everything in one place. Finally, we have specialty versions that we can pull out of this. These are subsets of the overall ICD. If some specialty doesn't want to see the whole classification, well, they see only a part of it. It must be something psychological, because in the end, as you know, it doesn't change. You have your coding tool, you enter the text, you get your code, and that's it. How to access the ICD? Well, I think we have repeated this a few times. Importantly here is that on this side here is an orange browser. So this is the maintenance one. This is where you make the proposals and where you can make comments and discussions. And this will also be in the Spanish version. And we discussed yesterday that we will be translating this whole page into Spanish. Of course, the working language for practical reasons will remain in this maintenance side, English. I don't know if someday we will have chance to have multiple language input, but at the moment we are constrained. Here in the middle is a lot of information material, much of which is in English, but we'll try to move one or the other end to the Spanish. And then here are the official browsers, where of course you will find the Spanish browser and the Spanish coding tool as a first entry point. But you can switch when you later are in the browser to English, and maybe later to Chinese and Japanese, whatever you prefer. So it will be really a multilingual tool. So the orange browser that you may know from the past is the maintenance tool. The blue browser that we have seen earlier in Spanish, that is the kind of official release that does not change every day. And the thing is, as I say, you add there the proposals and the comments but first you need to register. And so registered users can comment on the content, submit proposals, read comments of others, make comments on proposals, and even can access PDF and Word versions for download if for whatever reasons you are interested in this. And this is how the browser looks like very briefly. So we have here a lot of information. I'm not going into detail. The most important thing is that we have here all these different user guides and other materials. And if you were in the blue browser and we go into information, you even have the transition tables for coding from ICD-10 to ICD-11 or ICD-11 to ICD-10. And there are different versions. So one version is you transform the code. Another version is it shows you how many matching categories you have from different codes, so you can choose which variant you want to use for moving your data from one version to the other. Then we have the coding tool that searches all ICD-11 terms, and it really replaces the ICD-11 index. An important thing there is we have our translation platform. This makes sure that all these entities that are even below the surface are translated in the other languages, that you can put synonyms of your language independent of synonyms in English. And you may have 5 in Spanish, and we have 2 in English, or we have 5 in English, 2 in Spanish. Doesn't matter. You choose, and you even choose what the preferred term is. And this makes sure that the same technology that we are having now for English, as you have seen, you can use in Spanish. And this is true for the browser, for the coding tool, for all the print outputs, for all the files, everything. This also makes sure that for the first time in history of ICD, we can really compare languages and produce multilingual versions. So if then users see, for example, an English-Spanish browser and say, this looks strange, I don't know this translation that way from English into Spanish, well, they can provide feedback, and we can even improve the classification over time or add missing terms or correct small mistakes. So that's the big advantage. Finally, the coding tool, of course, has a layer that is language specific. This means language standardization. The colleagues that are using IRIS, they know this. There is a language standardization. We have the same thing here. We have some generic synonyms like leg, can be lower extremity, and some other things, so we can standardize this. And then there are nice mechanisms for having words that usually have no meaning but are put there for grammatical correctness, that don't bias the results. Sometimes words can be written as one word or as 2 separate words. So these things are language specific. For English, putting this in place has taken about 2 weeks, and Spanish we will see. But these are generic tools that exist for any kind of electronic application, so they can be plugged in, and then this system can search on the language independent part of the foundation, where we have the instruction: what is a synonym, what is a normal text, what kind of things can you combine, where are the cross-references. So all this information is used by the coding tool. And that's why we say don't download a list and try to program your coding yourself, because you don't have this information easily accessible. Now here is a simple search, as you were saying, cancer of stomach, or earlier we have seen, what was it, the cancer of breast, where you then get a result. And the most important thing is that you don't see here well on this slide, that normally, because this is the full match, this should be light blue with an asterisk, so that you know this is the full match, and you can say, I found this, done. In clinical application, this means, depending on how you set up your system, that you can tell if there is a blue match, just take it over and don't even ask whoever is doing the recording. And only if there are multiple matches, the system may show you a short list, and you click the one that you want, and coding is done. So it's easy and available even in environments that have little time. Okay, and here we have another coding system that is called the flexible search, and I don't know if you have showing this. So there you can put rather complex constructs, and I was making a test earlier with the chronic instability of the right chronic instability of the lateral collateral ligament of the right knee joint, and you put this in the coding tool, and the coding tool, I don't find this. Of course not, because the text string is not there. But then you go to the flexible search, and then the system will understand, chronic instability knee joint, one code, right, next code, lateral collateral ligament, another code, and it gives you the whole string. And then it's your choice if you want to use everything or if you just use a code for chronic instability of the knee joint. So, and then we have a little bit more examples on the flexi search, but finally, when you did all the searches, you then can get to the main browser picture, and then, as you can guess here from the picture, you can add even more detail of all kinds, so more anatomical detail, a histopathology, a laterality, a drug that was involved, so all this information. But I always say, you can do it if you want it or you need it for a study, but it's not required. Required is one code, and the minimum level of reporting is the 4-character category, the same way that the minimum level of reporting in ICD-10 was a 3-character category, everything before the decimal point. So ICD-11 has some 26 chapters, 17,000 codes, special tabulation lists, we kept them. We have the section on functioning, a short word here. So since we have been working on this in the past 2 years, so that's a section for functioning assessment. It is using the WHO assessment as a schedule to calculate a summary score from the responses received. And with this, you can really do a rating of a patient before the treatment and after the treatment, and monitor the course, and you can really see whether people improve or not. We do this so that people get also a little bit of a feeling of the ICF, and if they get really excited, they can use the full ICF, but with this, you can start using the ICF scheme in a very, very practical way. Then we have the section on traditional medicine, but careful, it's only diagnosis in traditional medicine. We do not endorse any kind of therapy. And finally, we have the extension codes that you have seen before and the multiple languages. So no change to ICD, and that was a result that we put after our last discussion with you because people were very worried. So maternal cases are still with the maternal section, nothing changes. The only recommendation that we do is that you please code the detailed disease and the maternal code. Why? Even the people that were totally against code combinations were saying, actually this is very practical. And the example is, you think you have an indirect maternal death, and in ICD-10 you would code some 099, and you have the very precise disease. And then when you do the data checks, it turns out it was not an indirect one, and then you lost all the detail of the disease. So if you can and keep this together, you can really retain the detail. And there are several different cases where this applies to, and that's why we say we don't enforce multiple coding, but we recommend to use the modern technology because this will improve the quality of data. Perinatal cases have remained the same. Injuries have remained injuries. External causes have remained external causes, and tumors are all in the tumor chapter. And even the mortality rules have not changed. They have been only adapted so that they can be applied with the ICD-11. We had several people work on it to simplify the English language so that it's more clear and easier. And we just had the last round, some young colleagues from China. They are expert coders, but they have kind of okay knowledge of English. They really read the whole thing and came up with tons of questions about where they were not clear about meaning, so we can correct this so that people that do not speak English as a primary language can still understand the instructions. We have one special topic, and I'm repeating this because we received many, many questions in between. There has been an article in the Nature and questions also to different parliaments. So traditional medicine is a supplementary chapter. It's by no ways replacing any of the other chapters. And the recommendation is that you please quote something from the main chapters, and if you want, you add a traditional medicine diagnosis so that there is no confusions for statistics, because in the end we want to be able to monitor outcomes, progress and other things, and if traditional medicine remains totally separate, number one, we cannot do this, and secondly, we cannot compare between the sectors, so that's very important. Second thing is, again, it's only diagnosis, no therapy. WHO will never recommend anything that means killing a rhinoceros or powderizing some rare plants or other things. No, no, it's only diagnosis. One important thing is we have one module now that is the traditional medicine that comes from ancient Chinese medicine and that has been very much developed in 3 different countries but in slightly different directions. So it's a common denominator there. We know that there are many traditional medicines in other regions. In some traditional medicines are very much standardized and structured, like the ancient Chinese, also like the Ayurvedic medicine in India, but there are also some kind of, how to say, natural medicine approaches with which Dr. Enemas and other things, this is not what we are intending, or people that feel like they self are magicians and are doing some funny things. No, 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 not this ever. Yeah? But this has to be standardized, structured traditional medicine, and there may be more modules coming. The other special topic that we have is the gaming disorder. We know that the industry is doing a massive campaign against this gaming disorder. But the gaming disorder is not meant for whatever. And I put here the Spanish translation that we currently have on the Spanish browser, because then it's also easier for the translators and also for you. And the main point is you really have to have a loss of control. You give priority to the gaming and forget your daily commitments, your social environment, your friends. And you had negative consequences. You lose a job, bad school rating, and it lasts more than 1 year. And then you have gaming disorder. If you play 24 hours for a month, have fun. If your life works, everything is okay. 24 hours will be tough, however. So it's not meaning that while you play every day, what is this with the bonbons that are falling, with the sweets? Candy Crush or so every day. Fine, enjoy Candy Crush, doesn't matter. Yeah? As long as you are able to do your job, everything is okay and you don't lose your friends. So that's the message. And this is not to be ugly against the gaming industry. The point is we did a review of the literature also. And 160 publications were mentioning criteria that they used for inclusion of the cases. And well, you have a prevalence that ranges between 0.3 up to 30% in a normal population, and a range of 30% up to 60% in prevalence in the ill population, and then in the population under treatment you have a prevalence range between 60 and 80%. And I don't need to tell you that this tells you that people are not using the same criteria. And in fact, in these 160 studies, they were using about 35 or 40 different ways of diagnosing gaming disorder. And this means we have to standardize the definition so that we collect the data in a uniform way and we can link just the treatment recommendations, prevention programs to something. At the moment we can say there is a serious problem, but it's even very difficult to see how high is it, how much is it, and where is it. So we will keep this on the agenda, and it looks like we are having also a dialogue with the industry to make them understand. And most interestingly, there is one group that really fights against this with anything they can. Then there's a group of software producers who say, yeah, we put some instructions, you can set a time limit to your gaming. And the people that are producing the gaming devices, they all have this kind of settings where you can say, limit your gaming times. You get reminded, say, 5 hours, it's enough, or 8, or 12, or 20, depending on your likings. And then you don't run into risks. So that it was very close to my heart to tell you this, because it's important that also when it gets to your political levels, people get the correct briefing about the intention. This is not to stigmatize, not to do harm, but to be able to help people that need help. Yeah, here. So we received 70, 80 letters from governments, NGOs, professional associations, covering 60 member states, and they were all in support, and we have been sharing this also at the executive board meeting, and here you see the results of the scoping reviews, more or less, I said the correct figures by heart, yeah, where you really can say that there's something needs to be done. It's not helpful to have information of this kind. Now, never to forget the reference guide, you know it all. It has a description of the structure of ICD. It has 3 big sections now. The first section gives some simple information for people that will never be digging deep in the classification and the context so that you can learn quickly what it is. The section 2 has a lot of detail where all the coding instructions are. And the section 3 describes the differences between ICD-10 and ICD-11 and also the reasons for having these differences. And then we have annexes like the death certificate that you know from the 2016 version and some other materials as usually come with the classification. We have fully rewritten the morbidity rules. Why? You may remember the discussions at the last meeting where we had the reason for encounter after assessment at the end of the stay, and some people thought, so the cough is the main diagnosis, and say, no, you have the cough, people get a diagnostic, and then we find out it was a pneumonia, and of course the pneumonia is a diagnosis. But based on your intervention, we also have clarified the text description so that maybe now there is less of a misunderstanding. And finally, there we have the annexes. So very briefly, mortality rules, what has changed or not changed. So you know all this very simple picture. And that's why we're using IRIS if we can, or decision tables. Yeah. But in all fairness, the rules always have been like this. Nobody has been sitting down in the past and printed this out, so that's the second part, it didn't fit on one screen. So nobody ever has taken time to spell all this out. But this is the reason why you need so much training when you want to do the manual coding. The point is now we have the rules have been edited so it's easier understandable and it's a flow. I know the first version that we were showing with the ICD-10 2016 version was very heavy to digest, and we are also been doing some analysis on the data, people with IRIS. And then it turns out for 80% of the cases you have the general principle, and the remaining 20% they need all of this. And out of these rules, some rules apply to 1% of cases. And knowing the coding quality and the reporting quality, you can say, do we really need the rule? So some extensive work is now going on with the colleagues that work on IRIS, and eventually also the region can participate to examine which rules do really change the frequencies in the different categories at a level that is more relevant than the bias coming from normal coding and from the normal reporting, and maybe we can simplify the rules in the future. You may know that we made a simplified mortality list of the ICD. We call it small for some countries that started building funny things. And if you use this simplified list, you can handle with 26 rules that are applied in sequence, and you get nearly to the same results as with these highly complex rules. So there will be some work going on in the next years to try to simplify this for the benefit of everybody. As said earlier, basically there are no major changes in the rule, because also the idea was if we change the classification and we change the rule, we will get lost in the whole system. So keep the rules essentially as they are. There were no big requests for any big epidemiological changes in the context. The text has formatted for easier wording, and where we did a review, we just adapted it to the changes in the ICD, and that's it. Then basic concepts, so finding the starting points. So some basic concept ideas have been merged. The terminal cause of death has become direct cause of death. That's just following some practice. But this is kind of fine-tuning the kind of wording and ways described. The outcome will be the same. It just simplifies this very complicated text we had in the volume 2 of ICD-10 2016 version. And at the moment, we are still working to revise the code ranges that are given in these different coding lists and instructions, because in some places the structure of ICD has changed and we need to adjust this to really match the new coding structure. And of course, we had some structural changes, for example, the axis for transport injury events or the level of detail for poisonings between chapter 22 and 23. So these are the adjustments we are making with the rule, but really with the intention just to have the same results in the new structure rather than changing radically everything. There will be certainly a change because, you know, we have this new chapter on allergies, and this means that allergies may be now recorded by kind of allergy and less with the substance, with the idea behind that, well, how can you prevent exposure to bees and other things? You rather make sure that people have an allergy, have appropriate training, and maybe also some drugs and things that they don't die of that kind of allergy. Good. And then, for example, things where we need to work on, you see it here, unspecified HIV, stage 1 HIV, laboratory evidence. Before was a symptom code, so now it's part of stage 1 HIV. And then we have also some changes in sepsis, septicemia, and tears that were handled differently in ICD-10, where we need to make some changes. And you see here the coding of anaphylaxis that has moved to chapter 4. So yes, there are some changes, but it doesn't mean a revolution in the rules. It just means really adjustment to the new structure. And finally, also the guidelines for certification of coding of diabetes need to be changed or partly removed, because we do not have anymore these 4 character subdivisions we had in ICD-10. You may remember diabetes with renal complications, with vascular complications, with eye complications. Well, the physicians among you will know that if somebody has eye complications in diabetes, you also have kidney complications and other complications. So when you looked at the statistics, you saw that 50% were unspecified, then you had another 30% were multiple complications, and the rest were some specific ones. So statistically speaking, you cannot make anything about this. It's meaningless. And so I reduce the level of detail, make the rule simpler, and if you are in a clinical environment or if you are in a specialized research environment, you can still add a code and say what the specific complications were for the case, but in routine, this doesn't really help. And we need to adjust to the structural change of malignant neoplasms in ICD. Just to remind you that we said brain tumors, whether they are invasive or non-invasive, are kind of malignant all the time. So why separate them in those who are benign but still killing you and those who are malignant and still killing you? Put them into one group. And for the hematological neoplasms, similarly, the scientists are finding new things every week, and then 1 month something is a malignant hematological neoplasm, the next month it's a benign one, and in ICD we cannot make these updates all the time. And if you say, I collect data only for the malignant one, you don't know what you are collecting, because sometimes they are in, sometimes they're out, no point. So we said they also get out of the scheme, are always recorded in the registries, and with this we eliminate that kind of problem. So what did not change? So underlying cause of death definitions unchanged to ICD-10. Definitions related to fetal, perinatal, neonatal, infant mortality essentially unchanged. Definitions related to maternal mortality remain unchanged. We just added a special name for a grouping where you combine the late maternal deaths with the normal maternal deaths, so one can easier handle related statistics. Finally, the principles have unchanged for the mortality rules, as I said, and the requirements for reporting essentially also have remained the same. The mortality reference group is still working on some details there, and there may be some updates in the rule base. And for those who will be attending from here, the mortality reference group meeting in March, you can participate to this. Very briefly, morbidity rules. As said earlier, reason for encounter after assessment at the end of the stay. We want to distinguish clearly the morbidity coding rules that refer to content and that are related to specific healthcare documentation guidelines versus those that are guidelines for coders. In the ICD-10, this was a little bit mixed. And we're giving instructions when to use code combinations. We call this post-coordination, when we use extension codes and multiple conditions as main diagnosis. These edits are all based on the experience in the past 30 years with ICD-10 in a clinical context, in a reimbursement context, where there was a lack of clarity sometimes in ICD-10. This has been all brought into the new rule base of ICD-11. And then there are special coding rules for family history, sequelae, quality and safety, and post-procedural conditions and sepsis, as said earlier. Then we, of course, have rules for how to code an episode as a main diagnosis, special rules for patient safety, and as I said, special rules also for coding traditional medicine, just to make sure that in these different environments we have the same approach for everything. Now, you may feel a little bit like this here. I don't know if I can start this. No, it's a pain. Well, it doesn't work, technology. Okay, so normally you see there our poor guy who was moved through the wheels and then spit out again. And you see him coming in at the top there. And don't feel like this. It's very simple, it's very easy, and we're always trying to help you, to pull you out of this. But we're not yet finished, because just briefly to say, we have the differences in coding scheme that you may know. I'm not going to read this whole thing. Most importantly, we removed the L and the I and the O and the 0 because they really created confusion when people were doing some editing and doing things. And one big difference is that the first character in the code always refers to the chapter, and we start with 1 for chapter 1, and then after we are at 9 we continue with A, B, C, D, so you can really rely that this code corresponds to the chapter, no more mixing like in ICD-10. Here there are the extension codes, and I think one of the important points that are new compared to the last time, yes, you have severity and all these things that you need clinically, but here for the substances, we will include the international non-proprietary name, so the generic names, because they are produced by WHO. Few people know this, but they will be accessible online there, so they can be used as a reference. And for you, the relief, so there are 10,000, and we need them in Spanish. But we have them all in Spanish. We have them all in Chinese and in French and in Arabic, so all in Russian. So all official languages are covered. No need to do extra translations. And what we are also now adding is here health devices, equipment and supplies, so medical devices, because WHO has a nomenclature for medical devices, but they exist only as a book. And the community working there said the UN, the United Nations system, has a device coding scheme that comes from the 70s. It has become a nightmare. Nobody is using it anymore. We have the Global Medical Device Nomenclature, GMDN, that is produced by a company, by the industry, very expensive if we want to use it. And then we have the Universal Medical Device Nomenclature, UMDN, that is produced by a university in the US, but where the process is hard to control. And so the community was saying Brazil was having problems in these devices, India was having problems, and so decided now at a meeting recently, the Global Congress on Medical Devices in India, that they will now support us in doing this electronifying the device classification and put this here on the platform. So this will be used for ICD coding purposes, for example, patient safety, but they will also use this on their own for medical device coding and other purposes in that special area. of work. The problem solved with ICD, very briefly, antimicrobial resistance is new, HIV subdivisions have improved, some skin cancers have been added, and in many places we have adapted the detail to the classification to adjust with new scientific knowledge. We have the post-procedural conditions that were unclear, their use in ICD, because there was other specified and unspecified procedural classification in every chapter. This has been removed because it created confusion. Only very special post-procedural complications remain with the chapter. The rest is coded differently. Diabetes coding, I already said, is flexible and external causes. We removed some detail that was never used. And my typical example is that for the injuries with household devices, they were subdivided in lawnmower and some other things. And then you look at the data and you say 80% unspecified. So why are we imposing lawnmower on everything? Remove it. And if there is a country where lawnmower is very important, you can combine this with the extension codes, and then you will find the lawnmower, the kitchen mixer, and whatever you like. You can combine it and record it if your reporting system is good enough to reliably report that information, of course. Differences to ICD-10, well, we have these 5 new chapters. Blood-forming organs and immune system have been split. We have the sleep-wake disorders, conditions related to sexual health, where we have the gender incongruence. Then we have traditional medicine, supplementary chapter, a section on functioning, and the chapter for the extension codes. And just as a little reminder here, if you think some titles read strange, or means and or, like in formal logic. So the old question, fracture of radius and ulna, what do I code there, is now simple. It can be fracture of radius, or fracture of ulna, or fracture of both. All are coded there. And in some places it looks very strange, but at least now it's consistent with formal logic. Chapter changes. Mental health and neurodevelopment disorder has overall some new structures and new definitions, and of course the new code for gaming disorder. In the nervous system, we also have a lot of clinical restructuring, so the clinicians should be super happy. We moved the prion diseases in there because it turns out that it's eventually transmissible, but linked to a lot of genetics. And the point was, well, they are rare diseases, so whether they statistically reside in the infectious or in the nervous system doesn't change so much, but if for scientific purposes it's more correct here, fine. The nervous system received the cerebrovascular diseases from the vascular diseases. As you may remember, it was a very tough fight between the specialties, and finally we said, okay, it makes sense because many of the vascular diseases are caused by a combination of diabetes, hypertension, and other aspects, so putting them into one chapter is not correct, so you can say the target organ is the brain, so there is one place, maybe it makes more sense. Most importantly, it's still the same group, cerebral vascular diseases, so from the statistics you can still identify the same group. And the fact that the transitory ischemic attack is also included there doesn't matter in mortality statistics, because if it was a transitory ischemic attack, of course you wouldn't die of it. Then diseases of visual system have more detail. In the chapter 1, we wanted to minimize the impact on longitudinal statistics for the major infections, so they have remained essentially unchanged. But of course, we also have moved influenza from the infections into the from the respiratory diseases into the infectious disease chapter, and the antimicrobial resistance we didn't combine with the codes in chapter 1, but is a separate set of categories in the signs and symptoms chapter, and they can be combined with any of the different infections, so you can do full documentation of antimicrobial resistance. Now, you may know that WHO has these guidelines. They're called GLASS for documentation, Global Antimicrobial Resistance Documentation System, and they recommend specific combinations between bacteria and an antibiotic. We put them there, but as you know, the patterns change over time, and so we have some generic categories where you then can combine the specific bacteria with a specific antibiotic, and you can still continue the documentation in the future, even if the currently so exciting combinations are no longer relevant. Then neoplasms, I already have said, so we have changed this conceptualization of the brain and of the hematological diseases. One other information, we added some histopathology, the morphology of tumors, because in many places it's more relevant to have that detail than a fine granular anatomical subdivision. And if you need the detailed anatomy, please use the extension codes, and we'll add post-coordination instructions so you can put separately the grading of the tumor and even the stage of the tumor. And as soon as you put this, you can even search for it in the coding tool. It will immediately give you the sequence of codes if you're interested. Good, so this change in hierarchy we already have mentioned. Disease of the immune system, we see here immunodeficiency, the non-organ specific systemic disorders. What is this? Lupus erythematodes, rheumatoid arthritis, and some other conditions that originally were main manifestation in the musculoskeletal system, but we know now that it is a systemic disease, so this has moved in, and of course we have the allergies and some other immune conditions. Circulatory system, as I say, heart valve no longer dominated by rheumatic, non-rheumatic, but really by the type of problem there is there, and then subdivided by the etiology of the different problems. That's more modern. And then finally for myocardium we had some updates. The arrhythmia section has been totally reworked because it was absolutely outdated, and pulmonary hypertension follows the most recent recommendation. The old one was based on swan guns, and now we have, of course, wonderful new methods to measure and assess this and also treat this. Respiratory system, some specific infectious lung diseases have been moved to Chapter 1. However, if you have a lung disease with a specific infection, you still can combine the codes and retain the detail if you have the detail reported. The developmental respiratory diseases are now all located in Chapter 20 for developmental anomalies, and the cystic fibrosis, after long discussion, has been moved from, I think it was metabolic before, to the certain lower respiratory tract diseases. We also try to put more order between the upper and the lower respiratory tract, but it's a little bit of a tricky thing. We think now it's better. We will see in the practice where it has made things really easier. Sometimes you think in theory you're improving, and then in practice you don't improve so much. Let's hope it helps. Digestive system, also we have more anatomical groups. It has been systematically ordered from the mouth to the bottom, so rostral caudal, and it has more recent clinical detail, like for example eosinophilic gastritis and some other conditions. I'm not an expert in the area, and important digestive diseases still have been allocated their own category, like gastroesophageal reflux disease. Originally, the authors want to have a gastric reflux disease and an esophageal gastric reflux disease, or drop one, and we said, no, we need this there, we keep it. On the other hand, you have ischemic diseases of the digestive tract, the hernias and the other things that have remained in groups as they were. Diseases of the skin has been totally reworked. As I said the last time, there were disease names that were last described in the literature in 1919, and many diseases that were only in the 40s and 50s, so it was absolutely outdated. It has been completely reworked based on work that was done in the US, in UK and Germany for refinement, and it looks very differently. And if you have data for skin diseases, you will see mapping them is kind of a nightmare. It is really not comparable. However, I think now the structure of the chapter and its content corresponds to the knowledge of 2020 and not to the knowledge of 1920, so it's a big step forward. Genitourinary system, just to show you what has been added as some kind of highlights there. So a lot of different conditions that include some more female conditions, and of course also conditions like male infertility that was missing totally in ICD-10, and some pregnancy related things and kidney failure. Conditions related to sexual health, where we have sexual dysfunction, sexual pain disorders, and gender incongruence. I don't know what the last translation in Spanish is. The discordance, because I know that incongruence is a problem in Spanish, so discordance is a choice at the moment. And I know that there are plenty of groups that still want to change the name, but we also know that the interested groups have an international grouping and they have national groups. And sometimes there is disagreement between national groups and the international groups. So for us it was a little bit difficult, and then we said, no, there have been a lot of discussions, let's keep this as it is, and I think it's the best we can do there. Pregnancy, childbirth, so we have additional specifications for early pregnancy loss, and also the structuring of the overall section follows what the ICD-11 was already showing for statistical purpose, so that we really have a section on obstetric hemorrhage that apparently in that area is more relevant than some other subdivisions that we had in ICD-10. Chapter 20, developmental anomalies, has been restructured to really say anomalies affecting one specific body system, and then anomalies involving several body systems, and then going into specific chromosomal things and intellectual development. It's more systematic. Let's see whether it helps. Luckily, many of these conditions are not frequent, so I think we will still, in the statistics, in the special tabulation list, lump most of it into one category, saying developmental disorder, because otherwise we don't get enough cases there. External causes of morbidity and mortality, as said earlier, we removed detail, like for example lawnmower and other things that were never reliably reported, and one can use the combinations from the extension code chapter to add any level of detail about the site, about the activity, about the specific devices involved, and many other aspects. If you know the international classification for external causes of injury that has been developed by a research group, all the detail you could do with them, now you can do with the ICD-11 if you want. You're not forced to it. And then we have, of course, some new sections with exposure to extreme forces, maltreatment, legal intervention, armed conflict, where some edits have been done. But we have made sure that, for example, the level of detail that you have in the accidental or the non-intentional section is similar in the intentional and in the assault section. Because as you may remember, the accidental was a high level of detail and the assault a relatively low, and the intentional too. And if it turns out that somebody who had been coded to the intentional self-inflicted injury, turns out that was not the case, but it was an accident, you were losing all the detail. This is no longer the case. You will retain most of the detail. There are just some things that are not plausible as an accident, but otherwise it's really more comparable there. And then we have this totally new section on causes of healthcare related harm that was saying earlier, where a whole section has been worked on with the AHRQ and an international group to really make sure you can do full documentation of patient safety, device safety, and pharmacovigilance if you want with the ICD-11, because you can code all these levels of detail. And here you see, for example, for the medical devices, what we did here. So we have multiple parenting, and we have here individual devices. And I put here, for example, a backhouse clamp. That's the one that you use to hold the tissues around the body of the person. And you see here we are using this, that you can say they are coded to medical devices, and that's how it goes. But of course, you also have in the device section sets. And you can put the link so you can build the sets, and it's very flexible, and they were very happy to have this. And here you see, so it's shown in different places, but of course the code is remaining the same. Unfortunately, it's moved under this kind of colored section so you don't see it, but essentially it's the same as in other places. You can show things in multiple places, but they retain the same code. And now the patient safety, just to show a practical thing here, we have a cause of a harm, we have the injury or harm caused to the patient, and we have a mode how it came to harm the patient. And this structure is used in a standard fashion for this kind of coding approach. And here you have a typical example where you say some person, there was a respiratory malfunction that caused a pressure trauma with an air embolism in a patient, and then you can code all of this as you like. So, you can code here the cause of harm, and then you can say medical devices with ventilator adult. And here you have the mode, so functional device failure, and here at the bottom you can code the air embolism traumatic, and we can do the now I touched here something. Well, technical problem. There is another example where, for example, a patient has received warfarin, got an ENR of 6, got a cerebral bleeding, and it turned out it was an accidental. It was an accidental overdose, and then you can code all the detail. So you can not only code the fact that there was the bleeding, and not only the fact that there was a kind of overdosage of anticoagulant, but you can also code that there was, let's see whether it works now. Yes, but this is not the whole page, is it? Yeah, there is some part missing here of the page. Manca una parte. There's this example, and you also can do the coding that now is hidden by the technology, and where you can code all the detail as you like. So why ICD? I'm not going to repeat this. So improved usability, more features, functions, more scientific content, all this integration in electronic environments, and linkage to other classifications and terminologies. And when ICD? Well, I put here the ICD-10 in the wastebasket, but don't do this now. There has to be a process for this, and you will learn more later on, and also make some exercises on this. When you're ready, necessary is to do good planning, not just to rush into this. And if somebody, well, here in the region, all countries are using ICD-10, but there are other regions where they don't use anything yet, or are just in the process of implementing that, and there we will not say don't change this. Some people that are using electronic death certificates, if they do full recording of the detail, they can recode all their data with ICD-11. We can make some batch recoding. ICD-11 comes with an implementation package. You have seen the browser coding tool API. We have the reference guide. We have information material online. We will have a transition guide. We have shared this, I think, half a day before the start of the meeting with our colleagues from PAHO. It's only 10 pages, so of course it's not yet translated, but it will be available, and it really highlights the main things why you would change to ICD-11. That's good for the decision makers in the country if you get the question, and it gives you main points that need to be taken into account if you want to move to ICD-11. We have a translation tool and all the other tools available. So that's now we got to the end, and because you were so brave, I show you here a picture of WHO headquarters in Geneva with greetings from a blue sky, but I have to say that's a fake picture. At the moment it should all be white because it has been snowing there and it has 0 degrees and not, I think, 38 do we have here today, or 35. So, well, it's a little bit chillier, but thank you much for your patience. I know there has been some repetition. There will be more here, but I hope we get to these 8 repetitions and everybody knows everything by heart. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctor Robert, por su interesante exposición en relación a lo que son algunas de las características del CIE-11, donde, resumiendo algunos elementos importantes es lo que es la seguridad, lo que es la incorporación de otros software
Of other softwares into our information vigilance system in the various countries, and especially that we have to be prepared to be able to progress on safety, and this tool is also making some elements that were not benefited easier. We are going to have a Q&A session, and can you hear me? Is it working now? Yes, it is. Okay, can you hear me? Testing, testing, can you hear me? Yes? Perfect. Okay, thank you, and congratulations, Robert. And we'd like to have that presentation available so we can also translate it into Spanish and disseminate that presentation. I have a few questions just for you. So, okay. First of all, it's a recommendation. I have observed in some descriptions for the categories and also pathology descriptions or definitions that the use of abbreviations in English, which is
A veces nos confunden al traducirlas a los idiomas, como el español. Entonces, una recomendación sería poner el nombre y luego la abreviatura, porque no viene así en todas.
not so intuitive in all cases, and we have had many questions in some cases. That's just a recommendation. We have also seen different codes. We know that there's been an increase in the amount of codes from 14,000 something, and you were talking about 17,000. But we have seen even 52,000 in some cases, 55,000. Does that imply, first, one is linear and the other one is the entire foundation? I'd like to know how many codes ICD-11 has now, so we can know how detailed it is. And sorry, but I have another question. And okay, I had already asked you this question, but I'd like everybody else to hear this, because it's been a question that we get so frequently. How are the different countries going to inform the basic cost? What's the minimum requirement? I mean, for the number of characters. Are you hearing me? Right? And the number of characters that this field, for example, is going to have for the basic cost, regardless of the fact that they can find it or not. Is it going to be with post coordination? Is it going to be with cluster coding? Or is it just going to be what it comes up on the field, 4, 5, or 6 characters? How many? And the last question, and that list, is it a list for categories also? And I mean, this very brief list for mortality. SMOL, yes, that one. What's that list like? How many categories does it have? Is it just a specific selection or a group of codes? Thank you. Entonces,
let me answer to this, otherwise I forget all the answers. And so this small list essentially based on the special tabulation lists that we have, because some countries were picking individual ICD codes and the data were no longer comparable. So we went through the special tabulation list and combined the general mortality with the general child mortality, so that we have the level of detail, and added a few things like the obstetric hemorrhage, and with this we go. The systems that are using this kind of list are using an electronic death certificate that is using the index of the iris for coding. And the system stores the term from the iris and the simplified code. This means that later we can recode the whole thing with ICD-10 or ICD-11, but for them it's easier because they use just the 26 rules in a one series, in one sequence, and with this they can select easily the underlying cause of death. But please mind you that in these environments, usually you have one cause of death on the certificate, maybe two, and exceptionally three, so they don't need so many rules. The most important was there to clarify that if there is an injury mentioned, please add also the external cause, and then code the external cause and not the injury. But that's where it comes from. The number of codes in ICD. So ICD-10 has how many codes? No, it may have 12,300. No, it can, depends on how you count. Do you count the 3 characters, the 3 characters and the 4 characters? Do you remove the categories not to be used in mortality? Do you combine external causes and injuries, or you count only one? Do you add illegally the additional codes for open, closed, or the anatomical subdivision? What do you do with the B codes? What is with the dagger asterisk combinations? So depending on how you count, with ICD-10 you can get something like 10,000 something up to 55,000, depending on how you count. ICD-11 is kind of similar. So you have 4,000 4-character categories. And then if you add all the more detailed ones, then you can get to 17,000. If you add extension codes, don't ask for the number. Okay. And so the typical example is that in the foundation, we have 70,000 entities, concepts, and a total of 105,000 terms. This means that many concepts have synonyms. Out of these 70,000, only 17,000 become categories. The rest are the roots under the tree that you can use in an electronic environment, yes, but this is where we are, so these are the numbers. Now I forgot your first question, sorry.
La primera, ¿cómo se informará a la OMS?
The different countries be informing this to the WHO. I mean, for example, they are using 4 characters in ICD-10. Are you going to be asking the different countries to send you their databases? Are they, I mean, how many characters will you be using for the underlying cause of death?
Is that we have the World Health Assembly will adopt the list of 4 character categories and optional 5 and 6 character categories. So the minimum is the 4 character category. That's why we have the decimal point. And if you can have more, okay. But we also know that this will be not reliable information from all countries. So if we get it, it will be good. If we don't get it, it will be fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Una pregunta. Bueno.
I have a question. It's something that is not really clear. We've talked about it in the sessions with Vilma regarding the codes allocation in neoplasia when the behavior is not indicated, the tumor's behavior. On ICD-10, there's a category which is uncertain behavior or unknown. On ICD-11, there will be 2 codes. My question is, if the doctor only registers neoplasia of such anatomical area, I imagine that the code will be unknown behavior. When do you allocate uncertain behavior? How do you register the diagnosis? Or who is allocating the codes? How can they know which one to choose? Because the coding presents the uncertain code and unknown behavior. That's one. And we were doing a revision from the diagnosis we had on the 1st and 2nd stage on the pilot tests. And so we talked about some problems. When you introduce the coding in the coding tool, neoplasia of the right ovary, I understand that we were on the last version. We were working on the last version in English. The fact of adding the terminology right sends it to malign neoplasia. links it to malign neoplasia. Well, Adriana says that it wasn't the last version. Yeah, yesterday she said. Even though, well, Manuel tested it today. So when you add neoplasia, which should be unknown behavior, probably uncertain or unknown on ICD-10, in the ovary, the fact of putting right side, it managed this as cancer. Those are my two questions. When the coder knows that this is uncertain behavior, neoplasia, or unknown, how can the doctor registrate, or under which term do they understand that is one behavior or the other behavior in this case? Entonces me pregunta dos cosas. Y una es cómo el codificador sabe cuándo es conducta incierta. El codificador sabe que es conducta incierta cuando existe un hallazgo histopatológico que dice conducta incierta. Si saben, para oncología, ICD-11, los tumores tienen malignos, están benignos, inciertos y in situ. Y luego sin especificación, desconocido. Esa es la razón por la cual esto se divide, porque en el pasado estaba enlazado junto y estaba incorrecto. Y ahora, si no saben si simplemente tienen neoplasma del ovario, neoplasia del ovario, va a desconocido. Listo. A menos que exista un hallazgo histopatológico y exista algún trabajo para la persona de salud para que pueda revisar el archivo y diga, bueno, era un tumor ovárico, pero aquí la histopatología dice adenocarcinoma del ovario o adenoma de conducta incierta del ovario, y luego se puede corregir. Sin embargo, esa es la manera de hacerlo. Con respecto a la conducta de la herramienta de codificación, esto es algo que ha mejorado de manera continua. Por supuesto, no importa si tienen un tumor del lado derecho del ovario o del ovario que debiese ir a no especificado. Si encuentran estas cosas, díganos a nosotros para nosotros revisar los algoritmos y lo que está pasando y corregirlo. En este punto no les puedo decir cómo ocurre esto, pero podemos averiguarlo, por supuesto, y tenemos que corregirlo, porque si no, creamos errores de codificación. Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody else? It's a question. One of the advantages of this tool, as it's been said, is that we can continue to make modifications along the path and to add things. And I understand that this is the closing moment. However, I'll put on the table once again, is there a possibility, openness to work on the traditional medicine chapter in originary people, disease, indigenous people? Those diseases, we have clarity that those codes are complementary codes that will not substitute the traditional diseases, but I think it's important. At a webinar, the colleagues from Colombia, if I remember correctly, shared some experiences. In some health systems, they registrate those type of things, so I think it's a beginning. If there is the defense from OPS or the intention to begin to work on this topic. Do you have anything on that?
There's a team in WHO that works exclusively on traditional medicine, makes a traditional medicine strategy and traditional medicine treatments. So we are doing the classification side of this. And yes, that's why we call it Module 1, because we'll have more modules over time. As I said, in many places, traditional medicine is not so standardized, so we cannot just say, please tell us worldwide about traditional medicine and put it in. This needs to be organized. This needs to be in a stepwise process. So, yes, we are open. I don't know how long it will take, and that is also a small detail. Somebody needs to be willing to fund the work in these areas of work. That's the other thing where we need to identify. So if, for example, there is highly standardized traditional medicine somewhere in this region, in individual countries, one can start a discussion, but then we also need a sponsor that is supporting this, because our point is also we can do things at a global level, but there needs to be more than one country that will be also using this. If I make a category in ICD that is used only in one country, I will get the question, what are you doing? If we make a category that is used in a whole region, that's a separate game, then we can do it. And if you think about this ancient Chinese medicine, well, yes, there are the 3 countries that are using it a lot, but otherwise it's used all over the world. So that's the principle. Similar for Ayurveda, it's used all over the world. Of course, there are some people that are saying they do Ayurveda and they made a 1-week course, and then there are Ayurveda specialists. And if you go to India, that's a several-year education where you have to have professionalism. So at that level, if we say, for example, that in Colombia or in other countries there is something, fine. Let's just make sure it's not only a local thing, but really used in several countries, and that a real process of standardization is in place, that we don't embark on some things that are kind of individual belief thing more.
Sí. Mi pregunta tiene que ver.
My question is related to certification on death causes, perinatal death causes. On ICD-10, it suggested the use of a certificate for this type of death. And even there are some rules for the coding of the main functions on the neonatal causes. Some countries use a unique certificate, though, and don't use this certificate. ICD-11 keeps using a different certificate for perinatal deaths and also rules for the selection of the main function, the main reason. Sí, es un punto muy bueno y con el... Sí.
After long discussions, we have said we stop supporting a separate perinatal certificate. Why? Only a few countries have implemented this, and the separate coding rules create a big burden on all these people that need to code the cases. Further, if you report the sequence between child and mother in the standard sequence on the standard death certificate, you essentially get to exactly the same results. So there is no point of having a separate certificate. The only thing that we are keeping is this sheet on additional information for neonatal deaths, but that's not the certificate, that's just epidemiological information in the context. So there will be no more 2 separate certificates.
Sí.
Perdón, yo quiero comentar algo sobre el certificado.
Comment about the death certificate, because when we did the revision as part of the group in mortality, there was a mapping for the region. And obviously the use of death certificate is linked to the legal framework from countries on one side. So in that sense, as a result of the mapping, of course, we know that there are some countries that have more than one, and there's a justification. Mexico, the need of information, right? So that is a very variable landscape related to the legal aspect, right? The regulation and the statistic and epidemiological area. And as I recall in that discussion, even though it's logical, it has to exist some standard, but we also have that issue. Several countries were asking, I can't have one single death certificate because I have a series of elements by which I have 2 or 3 even. And it's just a comment. Of course, there are alignments, areas that are key, but we do have that variety in the region. And I comment on this because as a result of that question, we have this finding that we had on OPC. That's it.
So let me briefly comment on this. So we have to, I think, see 2 points. One, that on a medical certificate of cause of death, you have the information about the sequence and whether it was maternal, perinatal, and so on. And then you have additional information that is subject to the legal requirements in the country. And if, of course, the legal requirements in the country request that this additional information is different for newborn, for mothers, for men, for other people, well, then of course there are different documents around. But the important thing is that the central part That would be the same, and that was one of the reasons why also for this certificate we had consultations, because we say medical certificate of cause of death form, as you say, there are legal processes attached, and even worse, you need to train the physicians in using them correctly, so that's something that you do once a lifetime, and then you don't touch this, because you create more damage with changing forms all the time than the improvement of the information is worth.
Sí.
Yes, it is related to the international model being recommended on the new version that attaches different data, for instance, surgical interventions, or states other questions, a different way of asking the background. I would like to know, do you have information available that explains specifically, that justifies the inclusion of those new variables in the certificate that could be useful perhaps now? Now that we're trying and going in two lines. On one side, we're trying to make this change, take in the recommendations, but also on IRIS we've noticed that in the certificate, the parties have adopted that international new model, right? It has an influence, all of those variables, to make it compatible. But so about the recommendations. And the other thing that I would like to know is, what are the advances about verbal autopsy? It was mentioned before, there was a reference group, but I haven't heard about the progress about this topic. Entonces, para los cambios en el certificado de muerte, esencialmente la razón fue que esta es información esencial para una categorización correcta de los casos. Sin embargo, esta es información que usualmente se omite, los doctores lo omiten, a menos que se pida específicamente. Tenemos un documento de resumen que documenta las razones por las cuales se actualiza. Puede estar disponible. Luis Manuel tal vez podría ayudar. Usted ha sido parte de las discusiones en el pasado. Tal vez otros pueden también. Pero se puede profundizar, puede estar disponible. Podemos hacerlo. Como saben, han habido intervenciones quirúrgicas, la razón por las cuales la razón quirúrgica sería quirúrgica es por la razón por la muerte. Para los casos maternales es lo mismo. Importa muchísimo cuál fue el momento, si es que hubo uno o más niños y otras cosas para causas externas.
In instances, the clinicians put only the injury, but they don't know how the deadly injury happened. So asking these specific questions makes sure that the cases can be coded as accurate as possible if the information is available. So that's the main reason behind this. So for verbal autopsy, we have a WHO verbal autopsy questionnaire. That is the 2016 questionnaire that had some small updates for clarifications. It collects information about the individual person that died with responses to questions that are asked to somebody who was close to the person in the last time before death. The set of questions is chosen that you can use, of course, physician assessment if you like, but even easier, you can use any of the existing algorithms, computer algorithms that exist for analysis. And there is one algorithm that is called InterVA, then there is another algorithm that is called in silico VA, and then is another algorithm that is called Smart VA. It's not that smart, but it's a nice name. And so they all try to filter out of this a diagnosis. Now, if you are a physician, you know the situation that you have a relative on the phone calling you and say, I have a friend of mine, she has fever and cough, what do you think it is? Well, then you start asking a few questions to get an idea. And then the only thing you can tell in confidence is she's probably sick. And the second thing you may say that probably she has an infection. And maybe it's related to the lung. And there you stop. And verbal autopsy is kind of similar. Yeah? So the level of certainty is difficult. Also, you cannot use the clinical descriptions that you have in the textbooks because the diseases present differently just before you die. You are in the crisis phase. So any symptom that are lead symptoms maybe are not so relevant, others are more prominent. And so people have been using different approaches. One group has used approach to have experts sit, groups of experts sit and say, okay, if somebody dies of a myocardial infarction, what do people remember usually before the person dies as a symptom pattern and a complaint pattern, and put this in a probabilistic matrix, and from this they calculate then which death was the one for this individual. Then others went there and said, we go to hospitals, we have perfect diagnosis of somebody who died, and then we make this history, take the history from the relatives, and then we match this, and in this way we get the information. Now, the ones with the experts, yeah, good, you don't know if the experts made mistakes. The one with the hospitals is very nice, but if you have been, if your relative has been in the hospital and you know a lot more, so your responses are biased. So nobody knows what is the perfect algorithm. And we have seen that in the field, one algorithm performs very well with HIV, the other one poorly. The next one is good for malaria and bad here. So it's a very tricky situation. And that's why, as a WHO position, we say, collect the data with our recent questionnaire. Then you can use all these algorithms, and it's your choice which one. Our recommendation is use all of them because it's computerized anyway. If they get to the same result, fine. If they get to different results, maybe somebody needs to assess. So that's where we are. The difference between the so-called smart VA system and these other VA systems is that the smart VA has only one category that is called maternal death, whereas the other one subdivides the maternal death in some subtypes, and the same for perinatal death. So that's one of the big differences. But this is where we are. While I'm here, we are just coordinating some of the work. The next steps will be, we have now some 12,000 verbal autopsies that have been conducted with this new system. We are trying to collate the data into one database and then see, are there any questions that nobody responds to, that are always unknown, or where the people always refuse, so we can remove them. And then we will also see, to do some work to see how safe are the diagnoses that are made with verbal autopsy. Just one information, the big difference is that verbal autopsy, the diagnosis at a statistical population level will be probably okay. At an individual level, you don't know. And you have the same on the normal death certificates, that if you check individual death certificates, one coder gets information, says it's breast cancer, another coder says something different, but then if you pull all the different coders together, all of them in their sample will have a 30% breast cancer. You can say at individual level, the verbal autopsy is not good, at population level it's better, but we don't know how good it is, so this is still some work in progress.
¿Puede hacer una intervención muy
Sí,
rápida?
¿Más nadie quiere intervenir, doctora Vilma?
Entonces, en relación a nuestro hacer un módulo para medicina tradicional de los pueblos indígenas, empezamos esto especialmente porque empezamos a discutir esto. Porque Biremia había, que é um órgão, é uma instituição de la PAHO, había terminado de hacer el registro de todos os pueblos. E aí discutimos uma vez com eles, e realmente nos parece muito difícil, é uma tarefa bastante a largo prazo. Então, se há gente que queira começar a discutir isso, retomamos o contato com Bireme, porque eles já têm o mapa de todas as culturas indígenas, pero é difícil por los critérios que Robert dijo, de uma maneira geral. Em alguns países não, pero em geral há muita dispersão de las línguas, pero é algo que poderíamos começar a ser um módulo para a medicina tradicional de las Américas, por exemplo. E solamente queria fazer porque tu tocaste muito brevemente em la plataforma de mantenimento, que é para nós outros nos saliu algo bastante interessante, não? Porque assim é lugar, há que escrever em inglês, pero onde se pode, os médicos, as ONGs, lo que sea, podem colaborar e contribuir com comentários a la CI-11. E se há, lo que entendo, se há muitos comentários sobre o mesmo tema, se vai a chamar comitê de expertos. E nós outros tuvimos uma buena...
And we had a good experience with this, and also in relation to some questionings about the inclusion of this paternal alienation, which is a good mechanism we'd like to recommend so you can use this. Bueno, tengo
there. That we didn't include the alienation, but it always has been in the ICD, and the working groups on pediatric diseases, the working group on mental health, and even child advocacy protecting groups. Nobody had any objection and said anything to remove. That's why it's still there. Of course, if somebody wants to make a change and propose a change, please put a proposal, put the rationale, and then the things can be discussed, sure.
Muchas gracias. Ya cerrada la sesión, doctor Robert. Vamos.
Fue un poquito más longa que...
Bueno, continuando con el programa, viene ahora un taller práctico explorando el navegador de la CIE-11 y codificando con la CIE-11, que va a ser expuesto por Nenad de la OMS. Por cuestiones de tiempo, inicialmente vamos a ver algunas cosas breves teóricas, hacemos el break para el café y después seguimos con el taller práctico.
Okay, first of all, I want to congratulate you for this great achievement you have obtained in terms of doing the translation. It's really great work. And I'm sorry, I lost the microphone. To reach that, and not only the fact that you have produced that, but also the way how you have done that, which really for us in the WHO, it's an exemplary process. For many other countries and regions, we now have a process for Arabian translation into Arabian, Russian, and also French. And we can always have a reference point for you who have done this generous work and the leadership of PAHO with Vilma, Patricia, and other people involved in this process, which is really, really important. And as you will find out, this is just the beginning. And what comes after? Well, as you can see in this slide here, it's really all the tools that are behind that. Now you're going to realize that we have the possibility to present to you in Spanish all the variety of topics. And this is a little revolution, if you will, on the way of how we use or disseminate this in comparison to what we had before, where we were working with the book, and we are now talking about distributing a information standard. And that's why I have this little illustration on the right side. Basically, you can see the tools in green, which are ready for consumption, to be consumed by the users. In yellow, you have the APIs that Robert already mentioned for consumption within the electronic aspect. And when we talk about the browser, which is ready, of course, there are some things that we still have to set up. Here we have the release, and we are going to move into the practical exercises and see what's moving along. Here you have the web address to use this, and it allows you to search within the hierarchy and also find support for the combination of the different codes. And as it's been mentioned before, we are going to have two versions, an orange version, which is the developer version, maintenance version, and a blue version, which is the official release. And of course, all of that is going to be available in multiple languages, for example, as we are progressing with the translations. But even more important, we also have the coding tool, and that's the Spanish version once again, with the website address, and that of course is going to facilitate coding, the coding process. And we have, how to say this, have this coding which is done by means of the index must not be done by means of the tabulated list. So this is our electronic index which we are going to use. So when you begin coding, people start using this coding tool. In some cases it's going to be necessary for it to be included into the tabulated list, the browser, to be able to perform certain combinations, and you will see in which cases they can work. But this interaction or integration between the coding tool and the browser or the navigator, we are working on that, and at the end of the day I will be showing you a new version of the coding tool which already has this integration. We don't have it in Spanish yet, but we are going to facilitate the coding process even further. So what do I want to present? I want to present this point that Robert already mentioned, that the coding tool allows you to basically code very generic terms. For example, I have the example of confirmed malaria that you can find many times, and we'll give you the correct code for the term directly. It's really simple, and you will realize that it's a simple, very simple process. Well, and not almost, but rather the next step will be about thinking how to automate that. Also, you will realize that for some diagnostic, more complex terms, for example, making a reference to something literality, specific anatomy, also have a automated index process which takes you directly to the combined code. You have the example here for frontal right glioblastoma, for example. Then you can directly access the combination for that code, for a post-coordination code. But you will also find some areas where you still have to make some combinations, and I apologize, but I have this example here. When we talk about diabetes, with a chronic or acute complication, you still have to use the browser to combine the codes between two codes, where we say, for example, for pre-coordination, for example, the diabetes type, and also the complication, in this case, the diabetic foot, sorry. Or in some other cases where you have a combination to provide more specificity, that's not automated yet in terms of index. So you are going to run into those examples as well, but that's a process that little by little we are going to see where we can automate that and improve on that concerning the use of our instruments. The other point I want to mention here is that when you use this coding tool, you are going to realize that some diagnostic terms are not moving along so well in terms of coding as in the English version. Why? Because, and we have discussed that before, we still need to make some adjustments, improvements within the index, and to allow us to have that functionality we already have in the English version. And in concrete terms, this is what I'm talking about. When we talk about synonyms in the Spanish version, at least, or for the moment, we have included or used the synonyms below every category, but there is another mechanism that we are using in ICD-11, which is global synonyms that are used as a substitution or a replacement for those words, and you have some English examples. This must also be done in the Spanish version, and we are discussing that with Fernanda, with Vilma, so we can capture and incorporate that into our terminology. The other thing is about ensuring that we really have all the variations of the terms that we have. For example, here you can see the use of the hyphen guion. Yeah, the hyphen, and of course that must also be programmed in the system. That's important, so we can have that flexibility and the functioning. And finally, we were also talking about making an improvement on the index by means of capturing the terms that you have in your countries. Thanks to the Cuban Center, for example, we already have 10,000 files concerning the causes of death, which we are already cleaning, if you will, and we are going to make an automated comparison to the index we currently have in Spanish, so we can see where, okay, we have the term, and where we don't have it, or where we have a variation. And when I was reviewing these for the exercises that we are going to have, for example, I had a multiple organ failure. If you go to the coding tool, you can see that we now have this variation concerning the terms on the index, but we don't have this specifically, and that's why you cannot find the specific wording. So where we have cases, we say, okay, national or local variation, whatever, we can incorporate that, and the way to do so is by means of really capturing your databases, as Vilma said before, analyzing them and including them. And that's the main advantage we have right now, that we can really build a very good close link between the reality of the terminology being used with patients by the doctors, and also the classification itself. So that's a key aspect. And yesterday we also had a conversation with Chile about having access to their database, and of course that would be an important point. And we are interested in having access to raw terms, if you will, and if possible with their how frequently they appear, because that helps us improve the algorithm of the index. Because it's not just about finding the term, but also when, for example, someone does a Google search, there is also the question of what comes up first, which should be our most frequent point. So frequency, or how often they appear, if you have that information, is really helpful for us. So I want you to take that into account when using this browser, these tools, because you will realize that sometimes it doesn't go the way it should go, because we still have to do all of this to improve. But you will also realize that if we are able to incorporate all these terms you have, you are going to have an instrument that is going to be really, really good in terms of capturing all these universe of terms you have. Is also going to facilitate the coding process in terms of time and quality as well. Okay, so we are going to talk about the exercises. We have two exercises, and the first one, maybe this can be disseminated if you don't have this page already. Okay, so here I have this page that is being distributed. And the idea is that we have included 5 diagnostic terms, and we want you to code them first in ICD-11 and then in ICD-10, so you can have an idea of the difference in terms of coding and also the tools that are used. We have also included the URLs with the tools and the browser for ICD-10, and for ICD-10, well, you are experts, so I presume you already know everything by heart. But if you don't, here you can find the link, so you can access the electronic version on the PAHO website. So, since we are a little bit behind on time, our suggestion is that maybe that area, that row, can work on the first 2 terms. In the middle, you can work on number 3 and 4, and here to my right, you can work on the last term. Of course, if you go beyond, you can work on the others as well. But when we ask you about your findings concerning, for example, if you have found the correct code, then you will know. So that's the main exercise, and we will begin with that after we come back from the coffee break. Maybe you want to start now, it's up to you. But the second exercise is going to be the same, but we are going to code on a coding platform just for ICD-11, and we have 10 diagnostic terms to be coded in that platform, and I've distributed these sheets with detailed information on how to register in that platform, and we are going to be talking about that later on. Once you have already registered, and if you have any questions about the process, please come to me and I will be giving you the information. Basically, so each of you can know how to do this, and then you can access this website, which is another one that you have on your piece of paper as well, and then you are going to find a website which is English only for now, but it's going to be translated into Spanish, and you just come here and click on register. Then you are going to be taken to another page where you enter your name, your email, and your organization or affiliation, and then you register, and you are going to get an email message. If you use your institutional email, please verify, because maybe it may end up in your spam folder, but usually it should be working fine. I think 5 or 10 people have already registered, and then you are going to click on the validation link. And then you access the system using your email and password, and then you are going to complete the registration. There is a form you have to fill, and then we start the most important part, because for this event we have established a PAHO center where you can find these modules and the 10 terms, and you can find this by means of clicking on browse. And when you do this, then you will find a center called PAHO. There are many other centers, but you have to join this PAHO center. And then it's also important, you have to go back to the main page, and as an admin I will be approving you, and then you will finally have access to the main page and you will be able to do the coding. But for now you just have to register, and then we will talk more about the coding on the platform. And most importantly, we have already coded those terms, so at the end of the day you are going to receive this information in terms of a score concerning how precise your coding has been and who's the better coder. So that's the idea for this exercise. So we are going to have our coffee break. Or Vilma, if you